This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something much quieter and much more dangerous. It's about what happens when the system that decides who is real starts pretending it doesn't know the answer anymore. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough to keep moving forward. Because once authority can declare itself legitimate, even after a judge says it isn't, the rules don't collapse. They blur. And blurred rules don't trigger alarms. They trigger fatigue. You are told this is technical, procedural, inside baseball. But stay with me, this part matters, because what's happening here isn't defiance, it's rehearsal. A system testing whether anyone will stop it when legality becomes optional, and titles matter more than truth. And the most unsettling part is this. The warning didn't come from an outsider. It came from inside the system itself, which is where this story actually begins. For a long time, we were told the system was controlled by law, written rules, clear lines. That's not true anymore. What controls the system now is assertion. Who says they have authority? And how long they keep saying it without being stopped. Because in practice, power no longer waits for permission. It performs legitimacy. It wears the title. It signs the paper. And it moves forward as if approval already happened. The courtroom is still there. The robes are still there. The language is still formal. But the center of gravity has shifted. Instead of judges enforcing boundaries, the system is being asked to tolerate violations as long as they're framed as procedural disagreements. That sounds minor. It isn't. When enforcement becomes optional, legality turns into a suggestion, and suggestions only work when everyone agrees to follow them. The system now runs on a dangerous assumption that resistance will be slow, fragmented, and exhausted. Which raises the next question. How did we get used to that? Because this didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived quietly, over time. And that's where the real damage begins. There was a time when this would have stopped everything. Before, when a judge said a government official was not lawfully appointed, the system reacted fast. Titles were withdrawn, cases were paused, damage was contained. Now the response is different. Now the ruling is treated like a suggestion. Localized, inconvenient, easily ignored somewhere else. Before, legality was binary. You were authorized or you were not. Now it's conditional. Authorized here, unauthorized there, real when convenient, irrelevant when not. This shift didn't happen overnight. It happened through repetition. Each time the system allowed an illegal role to persist for now. Each time it accepted a technical excuse instead of enforcement. Each time nothing immediately collapsed. And that's the trap. Because slow change feels manageable. It feels survivable until it isn't. By the time the consequences become visible, the behavior is already normalized. Which brings us to the moment when the system stopped pretending this was quiet and started fighting back out loud. Then came the shock. Not a riot, not an emergency order, a filing. A judge, acting on his own authority, asked a simple question. Explain why this isn't deception. Explain why this isn't a false claim of power. Explain why this shouldn't trigger discipline. That's it. In any normal system, that question ends the story. The official steps aside, the title disappears, the damage is contained. Instead, the response went in the opposite direction. The institution didn't correct itself. It attacked the question. The judge was accused of abusing power, of misunderstanding the law, of violating procedure simply by asking whether legality still mattered. Not by outsiders, not by political enemies, by the very people tasked with enforcing the rules. Pause there, because this wasn't a defense of one action. It was a declaration that even if something is illegal, the court may not say so. Unless the system gives permission. Stay with me, because once that line is crossed, the crisis is no longer hypothetical. And the system doesn't just bend, it dares the judge to stop it. Here is the mechanism. It doesn't rely on chaos. It relies on process. First, an authority is asserted without lawful foundation. Then, when challenged, the challenge is reframed, not as a question of truth, but of procedure. Who is allowed to ask? When they are allowed to ask. Under which rule? On whose motion? The substance disappears behind the process. Illegality becomes a technicality, and technicalities are easy to argue about forever. Meanwhile, cases keep moving. Signatures stay on documents. Power continues to operate as if nothing is wrong. Who benefits is obvious. The system that refuses to pause absorbs no cost. The damage is deferred outward, onto defendants, onto courts, onto future cases that now carry a hidden defect. Because if one illegal authority is tolerated, every case it touches becomes vulnerable. Not immediately. Later, and later is the point. This mechanism doesn't seek to win the argument. It seeks to exhaust the referee. And exhaustion is how boundaries disappear, which is why the next moment matters more than the argument itself. Because the system doesn't stop here. It accelerates. Then it speeds up. No long memos, no careful language, just pressure. The message becomes simple. You don't have authority to question us. You don't have discretion. You don't get to intervene, even if something is wrong, even if it's illegal, even if everyone can see it. The system narrows the window until only one move is allowed. Let it pass. Judges are told to stay in their lane. Defendants are told it doesn't matter. The public is told this is boring. And while everyone argues about rules, the machine keeps running. Cases pile up, challenges spread, entire dockets are put at risk. Not because the law is unclear, but because enforcement is being dared. This is no longer about interpretation. It's about whether resistance costs more than compliance. And here's the cliff. Once enough cases are touched, stopping the system becomes too disruptive, too messy, too late. That's when illegality stops being an exception and starts becoming infrastructure. This is where it reaches you, because you don't experience this as a constitutional debate. You experience it as uncertainty. You don't know whether the case in front of you is solid. You don't know whether the authority behind it is real. You're told not to worry about that. Trust the process. But the process is exactly what's been hollowed out. If you're a defendant, you're asked to accept a prosecution that may not be lawful. If you're a judge, you're told questioning it is overreach. If you're just watching, you're trained to tune it out. That's the damage, not outrage, numbness. Because a system that keeps moving despite obvious defects teaches people a lesson. That legality is optional if you can survive the delay. If this feels uncomfortable, it should. Stay with me. Share this. Pay attention, because once people stop expecting the system to correct itself, they start adapting to the failure. And adaptation is not stability. It's surrender by another name. And the consequences don't stop at one courtroom. They ripple outward. This doesn't stay contained. Because once one court is told its ruling only applies here, the logic spreads. Other districts watch. Other cases wait. If illegality can be localized, then enforcement becomes negotiable. Jurisdiction by jurisdiction, judge by judge, and that fractures the system. Identical conduct receives different treatment depending on where it lands, not because the law changed, but because the system stopped agreeing on who gets to say what the law is. That's when credibility starts leaking internationally. Because courts don't just resolve disputes, they signal reliability. When reliability weakens, cooperation weakens with it. Confidence erodes, precedent loses force. And the most dangerous part is this: no single moment marks the break. There's no announcement, no emergency declaration, just a growing awareness that the rules no longer travel well. What works in one courtroom doesn't hold in another. And no one can say when or if that will be fixed, which leaves the system balanced on uncertainty. And uncertainty doesn't pause. It accelerates straight into the future. From here, the future doesn't move in one direction. It splits. There are three paths. The first is adjustment. The system absorbs the shock. Titles are corrected. Cases are cleaned up quietly. Authority is re-anchored to law. Costly, embarrassing, but contained. The second is erosion. Nothing is fixed outright. Challenges multiply. Judges hesitate. Defendants appeal. The system keeps functioning, but weaker, slower, less trusted each time it's tested. And then there's rupture. That's when the accumulated defects become impossible to ignore, when too many cases are compromised, when enforcement collapses under its own contradictions, when restoring legality would break more than ignoring it. No one announces which path we're on. That's the point. Systems don't declare failure. They drift into it. And the danger here isn't which option is chosen. It's that the choice is being made passively. By delay, by fatigue, by letting illegality persist because stopping it feels inconvenient. Which means the final question isn't about law, it's about timing and whether anyone intervenes before momentum decides for them. Here's what makes this moment dangerous. Nothing has exploded, no verdict has collapsed on live television, no official announcement says the system is broken. Which means it's easy to look away, but systems don't fail when people panic. They fail when everyone assumes someone else will step in later. Later when it's clearer, later when it's louder, later when the cost feels justified, and by then, the pattern is set. Illegal authority doesn't need permission if it's never meaningfully stopped. It just needs time and silence and repetition. This story doesn't end here because it hasn't ended anywhere yet. It's still moving, still testing limits, still watching to see what resistance looks like. So don't treat this as background noise. Don't file it away as technical. And don't assume stability means safety. Stay with this. Follow what happens next. Because the most important part of a system under stress is not how it defends itself. It's how long it waits before it does. And that question is still unanswered.